the media wants answers on the situation with Charlie Hebdo. They want answers and they want apologies, in particular from Muslim leaders, from Muslims around the world. Let's turn now to CNN's Don Lemon, who is interviewing Muslim human rights attorney Arsalan Iftikhar. It gets a little bit contentious.
Do you have a problem with these cartoons, the way they depict the Prophet Muhammad?
No, not at all. And I think that if you surveyed the vast majority of Muslims around the world, they would certainly say that the killing of innocent civilians is not only a murder, but it's also against any normative mainstream teachings of Islam. And their acts are about as Muslim as abortion clinic bombers or gay nightclub bombers. Our acts are Christian.
Their words and what you're saying, no, that's not always a reality of what many people think about Islam.
Yeah, but Don, it's important to not conflate the actions of a very few to a population of 1.7 billion people, which represents 20% of the world's population. So I think it's important that to call out the fact that when Christians commit acts of terror, we don't ask priests and pastors to go on national television and condemn these acts. But sadly, Muslim public intellectuals, thinkers, leaders, and Islamic scholars, have that double standard that we have to deal with.
Yeah. So we've seen this cycle played out with basically every single terrorist attack in which a Muslim was involved, either directly or tangentially, that they are required to come and sort of apologize for it. We will turn to those apologies shortly. But what did you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, this is the same thing that we see all the time, and it's not going to go away, and Don is always going to ask that question. And one thing that I think is interesting, though, whenever they always say the Prophet Muhammad, all the reporters always say the Prophet Muhammad, which I think is kind of interesting because we don't say God's son Jesus or give me another example of that. But everyone always says the Prophet Muhammad, which is already giving up a little too much deference. It's not quite the cartoon, but let's have an honest, an equal sort of parsing of what we're talking about these people.
Right, the lumber liquidator Muhammad.
Right. The sandal-wearing Jesus.
I hear it is the most popular name around the world, actually.
Muhammad?
The single most popular name. Yeah, I understand that we perhaps justifiably get a lot of criticism for being so critical of Don Lemon, but I think that you need to. I want to turn to a particular thing that he said here. After talking, Arsalan Iftikhar said, the actions of a couple of Muslims cannot be seen to be what all Muslims believe, in the same way that when Christians bomb abortion clinics or gay nightclubs, that's not all Christians. And Don Lemon's response is, what you're saying, though, that's not always a reality of what people think about Islam. All he's saying there is, yeah, but people still think it's all of you. Well, Don Lemon, you're the reporter. Is it all of them or not? What is that contribution to the conversation?
A lot of follow-up questions. How do you get people to change that way of thinking? How do you get people to stop doing...
How do you get people to stop that line of thinking, Don Lemon? He's only on your show once, but you broadcast 5 days a week.
Right, but I mean, but it's reasonable to ask him, what aren't we doing?
Why is it his job to do that?
Well, you're bringing in an expert who probably has pretty good ideas.
He has an opinion, I'm sure,
right,
but it's
so
not
I'd
his
say,
job.
No, but I think a very reasonable question would be, so you're saying that there's too much conflagrating of a terrorist attack and the other 1.7 billion Muslims. Fine, you can phrase it this way. What is the media doing wrong? What is the world doing wrong that we keep making that mistake?
I like that version better.
Or he could say something like, is it 1.2 billion? Is that...
1.7
billion. It's 1.7 billion.
Dave just writes off 500 million Muslims.
I just said it right there. You see what I did? Come and get me.
You working for CNN now?
Yeah, that was my fact checking. But it would be, he could say, well, there are 1.7 billion Muslims, and then he could look at the Gallup polls on certain pernicious views that a certain amount of them hold, and say, what do we make of pernicious? That was pretty good, right? And then say, well, what do we make of this group that we actually have the numbers on?
In the next video he will do that.
Well, then please let's show.
You are literally made for that broadcast. So let's turn to the second clip, Don Lemon and the Muslim human rights lawyer.
Newsweek found back in August that 16% of French citizens support ISIS. Would you describe those who support ISIS as Islamic extremists?
Well, they obviously, have sympathies for that ideology. I don't think that would mean that they would justify the killing of innocent civilians or murdering people on the streets. Again, there's been no religion in the history of the world, Don, that has been immune from acts of religious terrorism. I mean, we had 9 Crusades, we had the 30 Years' War, we have the Ku Klux Klan in America. A Christianist organization. In Norway a couple of years ago, you remember, Don, Anders Breivik, murdered 77 kids on an island and tried to assassinate the Prime Minister of Norway, and left behind a 1,500-page treatise calling himself a soldier of Christianity. Now, we didn't expect every Christian leader around the world to go on national television and condemn him because we knew that he was a lunatic. But sadly, there is a double standard in place. When a brown Muslim commits an act of murder, then...
Point taken, Arslan. I understand where you're going with, but I just want to get it more specific. Again, in August, 16% of French citizens support ISIS. Would you describe those who support ISIS as Islamic extremists? Do you support ISIS?
Wait, did you just ask if I support ISIS? And I just answered your question. I said that obviously these 16% of people support the ideology, but again, I don't think that that would necessarily extrapolate to supporting of killing of innocent people. You can have sympathy for an ideology and not, support the mass murder of people. And
he very casually dropped that, do you support ISIS?
Just because he got into his mistake was, as I think it is in a lot of the Don Leminisms, he just keeps talking.
Yeah, he got a little tongue-tied there. I actually don't think that slight verbiage mistake was too huge. But I do have to say that I don't think the answer actually was that genuine, because if Don is quoting the 16% of French citizens, support the ideology of ISIS, let's just say that's an empirical fact that they've done the research on. So then the answer was, well, that doesn't mean they believe in violence. Well, I suppose that is true. It doesn't mean they believe it. It doesn't mean they believe in violence, but the movement of ISIS is pretty violent. So if you support the ideology, it probably does.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what that means for those 16% of people. I don't know that means they're going to do it, but the answer wasn't particularly clear.
Well, here's here's what you need to do, and what Don Lemon failed to do, and I like Don, but here's what he failed to do here. I like him personally.
I don't dislike him.
There, 40% of the young French Muslims from immigrant backgrounds, 40% are unemployed. And all they do is get hammered with, it says here, this is quoting Newsweek's France correspondent, they get inundated, deluged by satellite TV and internet propaganda. She pointed to a correlation between support for ISIS and rising anti-Semitism in France, adding that these are the same people who torch synagogues. 5 million Muslims, largely of North African descent, who arrived from the 1950s onward in the wake of France decolonization. So, and the question was, by the way, for whatever are any of these people sympathize with the Muslim state? And there's a difference between the word support and the word sympathize.
Yeah.
So you're at 16%. So you're at less than 1 in 5 who are sympathizing with the Muslim state, because what they are seeing
among... Is that
among
French Muslims?
No, that's French citizens. But it's overwhelmingly going to be,
of course,
young Muslims who are in and so what they're seeing is they're seeing a group of young people like them, completely ignored, disenfranchised, fighting for being proud,
taking control,
not being second-class citizens.
That's entirely
true. Of course, I get it. They're 1 gazillion% wrong, but you misrepresent the nature of the story by just saying 16% of French citizens support ISIS, because that implies what you're reacting to, Dave, which is support an ideology where if they go into a town and you're the wrong kind of Muslim, well, they're going to crucify you.
Yeah, why don't I ask that question? And of course, the last 6 weeks have been particularly brutal in terms of what ISIS has gotten up to. It's possible that if you were to rerun that, and I did look for more updated French polls on support for ISIS, I was not able to find them, that the numbers possibly would have been lower. I agree with Dave that the first part of his response to that, you got to go a little bit more in depth in terms of, well, that doesn't mean that they support violence. It implies that they're somewhat supportive, perhaps, although, again,
generally, I would say, I think it would, I can't give you an exact number of this, but I would say generally, if you say you support the ideology of ISIS, you probably are pretty okay with some sort of violence. Yeah. I think that's fair to say.
But also, it's personally frustrating to me that he then goes on to list examples of Christian either atrocities or historically or recent mass murders. And Don Lemon says, point noted, so at least, but then they're just going to forget it, and they're not going to remember the double standard there. But because not necessarily CNN, but especially Fox, is always going to say, where are the Muslim leaders condemning the violence, even though they always condemn the violence, we do want to make clear to you that they have condemned the violence. Massive condemnations coming from around the globe. We're going to read a few. First, the Council of American Islamic Relations issued a statement on Wednesday calling the terrorist actions a brutal and cowardly attack. The director of that organization said that the organization repudiates any such assault on freedom of speech, even speech that mocks faiths and religious figures. The French Muslim Council went on to say that the barbarous attack of extreme gravity is also an attack against democracy and freedom of the press. Our first thoughts are with the victims and their families, for whom we have total solidarity. And then finally, from Egypt, an official at the prestigious Al-Azhar University asserted to members of the media Wednesday that Islam denounces any violence, even if it is in response to an offense committed against sacred Muslim sentiments. So massive and extremely influential Muslim organizations all condemning without equivocation the attacks in Paris.